Welcome, everybody. It is noon in New York. My name is Justin Rivers. I am Chief Experience Officer for Untapped New York. For those of you who don't know me, but I think a bunch of you probably do by now. We have been having quite a stretch of Archtober talks this month. Actually, this is the final one of many, many. So happy that you have joined us. If you, I know I still see the numbers ticking up. If you're coming in again, Justin Rivers. Last of our Untapped New York Archtober talks. Sorry, but the hits just keep on coming. If you become an Untapped New York insider, and you can do so by going to the website and using the code Join Us for 2 months free to check it out. And we've been doing a lot of great virtual programming, and in-person New York-based programming has started again. With that, we will talk and end on one of the most iconic New York notes, the Brooklyn Bridge, and a really soft spot in my heart, obviously, for this subject, being a Brooklyn native for 20 years now. And we'll just get going. Well, let's try this. Oh, by the way, sorry, I totally forgot about the housekeeping we normally do. If you would like to ask me a question during the presentation, please put it in the Q&A. I will go there first, although I have been jumping back and forth between the chats, but wherever you want to put it, hopefully we will get to it. We usually do. Okay. So here's a great photograph of the Brooklyn Bridge, because it's one of the, even in this photograph, you can't see the entirety of the span, but it really is a sight you never tire of seeing against the skyline, especially when you are looking from Brooklyn Heights or Dumbo. It was said by David McCullough, who wrote The Great Bridge back in the early 1970s, which is an amazing bridge resource, not only for information, but he is just a gifted storyteller all around. And it was my first gateway into the bridge back as a college student. The Brooklyn Bridge belongs to Brooklyn Heights, and that's because it really was a Brooklyn initiative. Manhattan basically had to welcome the bridge to come to its shores, but the people of Brooklyn really were the ones who wanted it, and those who had the power to build it lived in the Heights at the time. We'll unpack that a little bit, but this is The Secrets of the Brooklyn Bridge, and it's based on the in-person tour that we've been giving for years now. That I put together, I think about 3 or 4 years ago. So we're going to take it more from the secrets perspective, but unlock history and structural elements and all that great stuff. I like to begin with this quote from Montgomery Schuyler. It so happens that work which is likely to be our most enduring monument to convey some knowledge of the most remote posterity is a work of bare utility, not a shrine, not a fortress, not a palace, but a bridge. And he was very true, even though a little wordy. He was extremely right on the nail with that. It so happens that this work is a bridge, and it is one of the most enduring monuments that we have to New York and to New York's ingenuity. So let's begin. Before there was a bridge to Brooklyn, there was a ferry to Brooklyn. There were some forms of ferries, even from Dutch New Amsterdam times, leading from Lower Manhattan to Brooklyn, basically the foot of Fulton, Old Fulton Street today. It's also this spot where Washington escapes during the Battle of New York and the Revolution, but it's not until Fulton creates his viable steamboat that Brooklyn really becomes a force to be reckoned with. And that force to be reckoned with comes with this, his first steamboat called the Claremont. And the Claremont, it was also called Fulton's Folly because nobody thought he could do it, but he definitely did. And Fulton Ferry service begins in the 18 teens and runs up until, I believe, 1924. And it is the lifeblood of Brooklyn until the bridge is built. But they will, even after the bridge until 1924, run regular ferry service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Here's a painting or a depiction what it would have been like to be on the deck of a Fulton ferry. This is obviously after the bridge is completed, and you can see there's space for passengers, there's space for carts. People are bringing things like cattle and horses and goods over the ferry because, again, this is really one of the only lifeblood connections to Long Island, to Brooklyn, and it is this ferry service, a lot of immigration, and a lot of sort of spread or sprawl that makes Brooklyn the fourth largest city at the time that they are building the bridge. And it is an independent city. These are two separate cities. When the bridge is on the docket, New York is separate from Brooklyn. The five boroughs have not yet been created. And this ferry did quite a bit to make that happen. This is a very old picture of the Manhattan Fulton Ferry Terminal. That's why we have a Fulton Street in Lower Manhattan. That's why we have an old Fulton Street in Brooklyn, because basically the ferry is almost like a continuation of that street, and there were Fulton Ferry terminals on each side of that street. And again, this was literally, for Brooklyn, it was the lifeblood of Brooklyn. As a matter of fact, Old Fulton Street was almost like Main Street, Brooklyn. Any business that was worth its wear was based on Fulton Street in Brooklyn, by the way. And here is the Brooklyn side, a lot grander. And as a matter of fact, you could see there's a trolley terminal right outside of Fulton's terminal itself. And that was a very big hookup because, as you've heard me say in other talks and tours, and if you haven't, I'll tell you now, Brooklynites loved the trolley. The trolley was their mode of public transportation. Unlike Manhattan, Manhattan did not use trolleys. Only two places in Manhattan that trolleys went, the base of the Williamsburg Bridge and the base of the Brooklyn Bridge, to give Brooklyn riders connections to Manhattan. Trolleys will go over the Brooklyn Bridge, but we'll talk about that in a second. But before, there was a particularly cold winter in the late 1860s. I believe it was 1867, but I could be wrong, that froze the East River solid. And that meant that the Fulton ferries couldn't work, but people needed to get to work. And a lot of people, even then, were commuters. Brooklyn was built on the fact that it was a bedroom community initially. Brooklyn Heights was one of the first bedroom communities in the United States. And people were working in Lower Manhattan, very much like we do today. But when the river froze solid, the ferries couldn't run, and people needed to treacherously walk across the East River to get from Brooklyn to Manhattan. And this gave everybody the idea that it's about time we have a bridge. And now the Brooklyn Bridge had been, or a bridge from New York to Brooklyn had been in the planning for many years, as early as the early 1800s. I believe the earliest plan was put down in 1802. There is in Vinegar Hill, right by Dumbo today, a street called Bridge Street. And that was laid down in anticipation for a bridge from Brooklyn to Manhattan. Not the bridge that we're talking about, but just any bridge. They said, just build us a bridge, and this is Bridge Street. But it didn't happen quite that way. But the Brooklynites who held sway in Brooklyn decided it was time to put together a company. Like you do in most of these situations, it was not city run or state run, it was proprietary, and the New York Brooklyn Bridge Company was started. They go through a litany of people who they think are up to the task to building a bridge to cross the East River, but they choose this man, John Roebling. And John Roebling had already established himself with an impressive suspension bridge in Cincinnati, and also a very impressive suspension bridge over Niagara Falls, which is no longer there. And he was the one who sold them on the idea of him, because he was really one of the first to sort of experiment with this thing called metal rope. And at the time it was iron when he first pretty much invented it out in Pennsylvania. But by time they're going to build the Brooklyn Bridge, there's this newfangled metal that is sort of miracle metal, and it's called steel. And it's going to be a lot stronger. It's going to be a lot more flexible, and it's going to last a lot longer. And Roebling himself, you could do a whole talk on John Roebling. And you can talk about John Roebling for 2 hours if you wanted to. Fascinating individual, way ahead of his time, so much so that people were really weirded out by him. He has very humble beginnings in Germany. He gets educated very well. He comes over to Pennsylvania and he begins a utopian farm society called Saxonburg out in Pennsylvania, and he gets bored with it. It's actually so successful, he's bored with being this, utopian farm leader. And he starts experimenting with this idea of rope, and he was fascinated by engineering. had some training, but loved suspension bridges, became obsessed with them because he felt like it was a great natural expression. Again, for those of you who joined me for Guastavino's talk, Guastavino too, heavily inspired by nature. John Roebling also inspired quite a bit by nature, by the idea that the two support towers and the roadway create enough tension that they can hold themselves up, thrilled him. The problem was at a time when this begins, or this type of engineering begins in bridges, it's not very successful for a lot of people. 1 in 4 suspension bridges in the United States by the 1860s and 70s were falling. And that was big deal. It made national news in the papers all the time. Basically, bridges that collapse in the wind were things that the public conscious knew quite a bit about. And that is going to affect the Brooklyn Bridge's beginnings a little bit, not structurally, but mentally. But he was also an esoteric. His first wife, his son's mother, Washington's mother, dies, and he holds monthly seances to speak to her. He believes in the occult. He believes in the healing power of nature. He's a hydropathist, which will come and get him a little bit later, meaning that he only believes in the healing power of water and not medicine. He had definitely New Age ideas way before the New Age happens. Now, there's this gentleman, this is William Marcy Tweed, or William Boss Tweed, who is going to become a thorn in the New York Bridge Company's side because he's holding the cards over in New York. He's part of Tammany Hall, the corrupt Democratic machine that was sort of making all of the pieces move in Manhattan, basically for their benefit. Him especially, super, super corrupt. He will die in jail because of his corruption. And the Brooklyn Bridge was one of his biggest projects. And actually, when he is put on trial, it is found that the Brooklyn Bridge Company is a party to fraud because they have to buy Tweed's blessing to get the bridge to New York with a $60,000 buyout, which is a lot of money back then, and also majority stock in the company itself, or shares in the company itself. And so that is why by the end of the bridge's construction, the bridge belongs equally both to the cities of New York and Brooklyn because of this guy. And here's Washington. Washington Roebling is the son of John. Roebling will die. John Roebling will die very early on in the first year of the bridge's construction. He will not get to see any of it. He's measuring for the Brooklyn Tower in Brooklyn. He's not watching. His foot is crushed by a ferry. He's standing on a dock. And again, he refuses medicine. He dies very painfully of tetanus a couple days later in Washington's home in Brooklyn Heights at the time. And Washington, at the age of 31, becomes the chief engineer of this project and is the only man on the planet who knows his father's work well enough that he could finish this project. So without Washington, we probably would not have had the Brooklyn Bridge, period. And then, of course, we'll talk a little bit later on about his wife, Emily, who without her, we might not have had the Brooklyn Bridge either. The Roebling story is very rich. It's very dramatic. Again, you could do a whole talk on the Roeblings if you wanted to. And a book came out 2 years ago. And I like to send out books when I send the videos out. Chief Engineer, the man, Washington Roebling, the man who built the Brooklyn Bridge. It's by Erica Wagner. And it's a really fascinating look at just how we sort of breeze over how awesome Washington Roebling is. Talented musician, amateur archaeologist and mineralogist, very, very, very well-rounded. And we sort of know him as the kooky recluse who really kind of didn't finish the bridge. His wife did. But there's a lot more to him, and we will talk about his story even at the very end of this, because he is the very end of the story. But secret number one, the Brooklyn Bridge had no name for 32 years. I loved this fact in doing research for another, again, all of this stems from research for other projects that I was doing. For 32 years, nobody ever gave it an official name. It was called the East River Suspension Bridge. It was called the Great Bridge. It was called Roebling's Great Bridge. It was called Roebling's East River Bridge. It was called the New York Brooklyn Bridge. Every paper, every person had a different name for it. It's kind of like what we do with the Queensboro, which is now the Ed Koch Queensboro Bridge, but some people call it the 59th Street Bridge. Some people call it the Queensboro Bridge. That's what the Brooklyn Bridge had until 1915, the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, which was the twice daily paper in Brooklyn, when Brooklyn was its own city, and even, well, today it's digital, they said, enough, it's the Brooklyn Bridge. It is a bridge to Brooklyn. It's our bridge, and that's what we're calling it. I love that fact because I can't imagine, and I'm sure probably a lot of you on this talk could not imagine calling it anything else, but maybe just the bridge. That's the only other thing that I refer to it as. But opening day, when the bridge opened in 1883, this was a holiday in both Brooklyn and New York. There was no school in each of the cities. People were home, they were partying. There was at night the largest fireworks display, as you can see here, off the East River, off the bridge span itself. It went on for an hour. Tens of thousands of pounds of gunpowder used to put this off. The president was here, of the United States was here. The governor was here. Everybody was here. And where were they? They were actually in Brooklyn at the Roeblings at one point. Emily Roebling did welcome everybody into their home. Here is another image of that grand fireworks display. It's always, I believe, did they do it this year? I don't remember, but whenever they shoot fireworks off the Brooklyn Bridge, they still do it periodically, but not every year during the 4th of July. It's just an amazing sight. So this is one of my, I wish I was alive to see this moment kind of thing, because it must have been incredible. There's also a really great story that opens the Great Bridge, and it's the fact that, you know, a couple of days before the opening ceremonies of the bridge, there were these people sort of trottling home at 11 o'clock at night, getting on the Fulton Ferry in Manhattan and taking the Fulton Ferry home to Brooklyn. And at 11 o'clock at night, they did the first test on the electric lights. And this was the first instance of electric lights running over the East River. And they just turned them on. And you could imagine what these people were looking at when they saw this amazing bridge built of this new metal steel with this new, you know, fangled electric light, the first time used over a waterway. Absolutely incredible stuff. So secret number 2, trains, trolleys, ran over the Brooklyn Bridge until 1954. A lot of people don't know. We are so used to the Brooklyn Bridge being famously a vehicular bridge, and then of course a pedestrian and biking bridge with the promenade, but trains did run over the bridge. And here is an image of the bridge taken early on in its history, and you can see these cars coming at us from Brooklyn. And you could see just the amount of people on the promenade. Now, we are pre-pandemic, New Yorkers were used to this type of crowd, but that was a recent thing. About 10 years ago, it started really getting crowded up there. And obviously you could see that's the way it started. But you could see the train tracks. So the train tracks were on the extreme lanes closest to the promenade, both outgoing to Brooklyn and incoming. This is what the train sheds looked like. This is at the base of Park Row. That's right next to Pace, by the way. Behind this open space here, the municipal building will end up landing here, and City Hall Park is on the left side. Really elegant looking train sheds, which again sort of connected commuters who were coming over the bridge to streetcars in Manhattan and eventually subways later on. Not at this point, but eventually. This is the Sand Street. So this is the Brooklyn train shed, a shot from Sand Street in the 30s. And a postcard, which sort of looks over all of the Civic Center. So you've got City Hall, where my cursor is, Pace University, and then here it is right at the base where, again, for those of you who have walked over the bridge from Manhattan to Brooklyn may know this is where the walking path starts to get you to the promenade. All open space now, but then it was train shed. And here is a depiction of what the inside of these sheds looked like. Airy, open, nice, well-dressed people, of course. But one of the people who was obsessed with the building of the bridge and was ironically not used to light the bridge was Thomas Edison. And Thomas Edison was fooling around with his motion picture camera. Thomas Edison had offices in Lower Manhattan on Fulton Street, and he watched with great interest them build the bridge. And then finally, when the bridge was completed, he did some of his initial tests with his motion picture camera on the bridge itself. And so here is an Edison train ride in 1899 from Brooklyn to Manhattan, done by Edison himself. You can see here he's leaving the Brooklyn side train depot. It's almost like a slow roller coaster. A couple of things to notice is, okay, the placement of the train tracks on the bridge span. You can see the carriages going by. You can also see the people walking on the promenade. Take a look at those light fixtures, by the way, on the promenade. They are the same light fixtures that are there today, the lamp fixtures, same ones that are there today. I'll tell you a little story about that in a minute. Well, actually, I could tell you now, there's nothing going on, except you're watching the approach to Manhattan. But Edison really wanted to get the contract to light the bridge because, again, it was going to be a historic moment, the first time electric light was used over a river or waterway. But his prices were way too high. So they went with another smaller electrical contractor based in Connecticut. And his light basically glowed like grayish blue. This contractor, whose name is now I'm forgetting, but Edison's light glowed a warm yellow. So every time Edison saw that blue light, it drove him absolutely crazy. And here you can see again the approach into the train shed. It's a really neat glimpse into 1899 New York, period. And of course, slightly dark and fuzzy. That's not your computer. It's just the quality of the recording. No high definition back then. All right, secret number 3. The anchorages were supposed to be retail spaces, but became wine cellars and fur vaults. And the fur vault information was actually given to me in quiet confidence. So, well, she just said, do what you want with it, but we'll talk about that. So the anchorages, so what is the job of an anchorage? First of all, the job of an anchorage is to actually anchor the cables of the suspension bridge down onto terra firma on both sides of the bridge. And so for the Brooklyn Bridge, basically that entailed arduously, almost like knitting over the East River, throwing 1-inch lines of steel rope over and over and over and over and over again until finally, after, and it took 7 years for the Brooklyn Bridge, that you get the suspender cables done. Then what they do is they anchor them to these eye bars. They sink the eye bars, surround them with cement, and build the anchorage masonry buildings on them. And those are anchorages, and they are, for the Brooklyn Bridge, just absolutely amazing. Of course, that's the extreme Cliff Notes version. But here you can see the 4 feet, eye-barred feet of the 4 main suspender cables of the bridge itself. And again, once they're done with all of this, they're going to sink all of this down into the ground, cement it, and then build the anchorages over it. And this is a shot of the Manhattan anchorage on the bridges close to completion, not yet completed. And this is the Manhattan anchorages. Now, what you'll see here, each of the portals in the anchorage had 2 rows of windows. They had entrances. They had these little bay, some of them had those bay windows down there, which are all gone now, by the way, because the Roebling said, use these as public spaces. We've taken up a lot of street space, use them as arcades, as businesses, as shops. As again, you know, in the Queensboro Bridge, some of you, that there was an open air market that was put in there for the locals. But because of the corruption of Tweed and because there was a lot of money that went missing and needed to be recouped, the city quickly took over control, both cities took control of the anchorages and did other things with them. Mainly, one of the most famous things that we know about is they turned the Manhattan anchorages into wine cellars. But we did a talk, Insiders did a talk with Scott Francisco a couple of months ago, who won the Van Allen redesigned Brooklyn Bridge contest over the summer, Rethink Brooklyn Bridge. And one of the things, besides adding better access for pedestrians and bikers on the promenade, was to very much utilize the anchorage spaces again, with these sort of pop-out retail spaces and studios and classrooms for kids to serve the people in the neighborhood. And you can see here this sort of bike ramp. This was a immediate add-on, he said, that he wanted to do to increase biker access, with bikers having their own lanes. Now, again, this was chosen as a winner of a contest. Doesn't mean it's actually happening, but he would like to see it happen, and he's working with the DOT to try to make it happen. But again, this utilizes the anchorages exactly how the Roeblings wanted them to be used. So we had a photographer who prefers to be known as Dark Cyanide, who snuck into the Manhattan anchorages, who took some really, really great pictures of the Manhattan anchorage space. And you can see here, these anchorages were doing a couple of things, especially in Manhattan, one of which was they were storage. The other was they were actually train access, which was intended but never used for the Brooklyn Manhattan Transit Company. And you can see here, there is, if any of you have joined me on the subway tour or the subway, underground subway talk, you know, at Chambers Street under the municipal building, I talk about how Chambers Street was supposed to be called Brooklyn Bridge. It was supposed to be called Brooklyn Bridge because of these derelict tracks right here. These tunnels lead out onto the bridge. And last minute, they had decided before opening the station that they did not want to stress the bridge with more weight, with subway trains going over it. And also there was, what you're not seeing here is it's a very steep incline and a very sharp turn for the trains to get the access from what we know today as Chambers Street under the municipal building in Lower Manhattan, turning onto the bridge span itself to share space with the trains and trolleys that are already going over the bridge. It just seemed like it wasn't a good idea, and they let it go. And today we still see the remnants of that in the Brooklyn Bridge mosaics in Chambers Street Station, which at that time, by the way, was a terminal. Also, as a lot of you who have joined me on previous tours and talks know, there's something missing, very important, in this image of the Brooklyn Bridge. And it is the second set of suspender cables, which we'll talk about in a bit. But here's another tunnel approach down in the Brooklyn Bridge anchorage on the Manhattan side. Here's a little snippet video that Dark Cyanide took, sort of just a quick dip. They were not in there legally, by the way, which is why the lights are not on. And this was also a really great picture because this leads into the wine cellar area. And here's the wine cellar area. You can see right here the word champagne. And the reason why these were used as wine cellars was the temperature was regulated pretty well to store wine and champagne. Wasn't too hot, wasn't too cold, and stayed regulated even in the summer because of their location under street level. The New York Times did an article in the magazine, and I believe it was 1978, and the article's great, and they talk about the inscription that they found on the wall of the Brooklyn Bridge Anchorage wine cellar, and he said, "Who loveth not wine, women, and song, he remaineth a fool his whole life long." And the reason why they put these wine cellars in, they charged very rich New Yorkers top dollar to store their wine there as a way to sort of help to pay for the bridge. There was a lot of money that needed to be recouped from the bridge building process. Of course, as I say, well, you could have charged people rent to keep businesses in the anchorages, but they did not. It was also said to me now about the fur vaults. It was said to me by somebody that came on a pen tour of mine. She said, "Can I take you for a beer?" She was from Queens. Her husband and her son had come. She said that her father worked for the DOT for 45 years, and for roughly half of that time, he was in charge of the Brooklyn Bridge. And in the 70s and 80s, rich Russians actually paid to have their furs stored in the champagne vaults because of the temperature. I have no idea if that's true. And she said you won't find any record of it because it was all done under the table. Nobody wanted anybody to know. Don't know if it's true, but I'm the messenger. I like the story. So on the Manhattan side around the anchorages also still is, because people are breaking into it, an iconic skate park known as the Brooklyn Banks. I have a personal connection to this. When I was a teacher, my career started out right out of college as a middle school teacher on the Lower East Side. And I had a student, his name was Izzy, who was a skater and wanted to spend most of his time skating and not doing his work. He did repeat a year with me, but the only way to get Izzy to do his homework was to find him at the Brooklyn Bank skating. And it did. And so, but then I just loved to watch people skate here because I didn't even realize it at the time that this was a world famous skate park. Now you're going to watch this kid here tell you a little bit about it, but because of all of the varying elevations and the ramps and the stairs and the way that this park was designed at the foot of the anchorage, it made it from the mid 1980s until they closed it down in 2006, one of the most coveted spots in the world to skate. And it was even immortalized in a skating video game.
Checked my demographics of the people who watch my YouTube channel this morning, and I saw that predominantly the ages are between 25 and 34, which is pretty cool that, you know, most people who watch these videos are even older than me. So most...
Boo. Oh, sorry.
Most of you probably remember Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games. I know it's before all the EA Skate games, but they were way better in my opinion. I think it was in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 or 3, but there's this very legendary and iconic skate spot in New York City called the Brooklyn Banks.
Here it is in that video game.
And from about 2006 or 8, you weren't able to skate it anymore. It was just a construction site, and you just weren't allowed to skate it or even enter the premises. Now, 10 years later, I'm not sure if they opened it back up, but I've been seeing a few people skate it again. So today, my plan is to go check it out and relive some memories, because this is like where I grew up skateboarding. So let's do this.
What he will find out very quickly is it's closed. He's getting himself a bagel, as any good neighbor before they go skating.
See you later. First up before the session, had to stop by Dollar Bagel. Grab a Dollar Bagel.
This is actually where I stopped right on the tour.
The Brooklyn Banks, it's actually located in Manhattan, not Brooklyn. It is just underneath the Brooklyn Bridge. It's actually only like 5 minutes away from my apartment in the financial district. I don't think they actually want you in there, and by I don't think, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to. Trying to find a spot where people get in, because I know people have been skating this thing like every day. And the other sketchy thing is right across the street is actually a police station.
It's actually a high school.
Just got word that you're supposed to enter from over here, but it's literally like right in front of where all the police officers are.
But that's one thing.
I'm gonna go for it. I know everyone's been skating it. I heard that it's a safe bet, so we're going into the Brooklyn Banks. I think I found our gateway. Feels so weird being
I just want you to see this like shot that he does. So good. Okay. That goes on for a lot longer. You see him skating the banks, which again, if you're interested, I could send you the full link, but it is amazing what you could accomplish at the Brooklyn banks. And again, it was closed off in 2006. He was right about that. Because they were doing restoration and renovation work to the ramps from the FDR onto the span of the bridge, which were built in 1946, by the way. They were repainting them, they were shoring them up, and they promised that when they were done, they would reopen the space. And it was said that by April of 2017, that the project was winding down and that they were going to reopen the park. April of 2017, I was doing tours, and I remember right around the week they said they were going to open it, there were droves of skaters standing at that very fence that he was waiting for it to be open. What did they do? They actually replaced the fence with a stronger fence. It's still not open. It's still closed off to the public. That's Izzy. I actually saw Izzy last year as I was working at another school in the Bronx. He jumped out of a car and he goes, "Mr. Rivers." And I said, "Izzy, I talk about you all of the time." Because this is the skater that I would go sit at the banks and do his English language arts homework with. Super cool kid, but he did not like to be in school. The Brooklyn Bridge was built on top of the nation's first White House, which is secret number 4, which also involves the Manhattan Anchorage, by the way. As a matter of fact, right where that skating guy broke in, right across Pearl Street, there is a very tiny plaque built into the Anchorage, which I'll show you a picture of in a second. But this was George Washington's first home when he was inaugurated president of the United States. And he only lived there for about half a year, not that long, but it was a White House. It was number 1 Cherry Street. John Hancock lived at number 2. This was like the Upper East Side at the time of our young America, because it literally was on the east side of Manhattan, and it was so far north from what Manhattan really was, which was still pretty much south of Chambers Street at the time, that this was a very affluent area. And here's the plaque. So number 1 Cherry Street was not bulldozed actually for the building of the bridge. It was bulldozed because they were widening the streets in the area in the 1850s, about 15-ish years before they started building the bridge. But by that time, what was a very affluent, posh area becomes it's the 4th Ward. It becomes one of the worst areas of Manhattan and the 5 Points. And there's the plaque. This is where, as you can see, where my cursor is, that's where it's built into the Anchorage itself. And that's where the nation's first White House was, soon to be forgotten. But here you see walkers walking from the promenade down into the train shed today on the Manhattan approach. This is what the pedestrian entryways looked like on the New York side from the train area. So you'd go downstairs in the depots. You would walk out of here onto the promenade if you were walking the bridge. And today, this is more what that view looks like. It was a very pretty day. I took that picture. Tragically, when the bridge first opened, I believe it was day 4 or 5, something had happened, which I said sort of calls upon the psychology again of the suspension bridges falling at the time that the bridge opens in the 1880s, which was a woman was walking down the stairs to get off of the bridge on the Manhattan side. And of course, as you can see, ladies are dressed very well, very large dresses. She trips and she falls. She screams. The woman behind her screams. The woman behind her screams. And then it gets basically out to the middle of the bridge that the bridge is falling. It's like a really macabre, awful game of telephone. And people bum rush off of the bridge. And what happens is there's a pileup of nearly 500 people. I think it's about 12 or 13 people will actually lose their lives in this pileup. And you see here the workers who are still finishing the entryways to the promenade are literally taking down fencing and steelwork to alleviate the pressure of the people bunching up. And again, this goes back to the idea that bridges were falling. Suspension bridges, which were not made as well as this bridge or of the same strength materials of this bridge, were famously falling, and people really had this on their minds. You have to remember, this bridge is the highest elevation that most of these people would have ever been at. As a matter of fact, if you read first accounts of walking over the bridge, people were amazed to see birds flying under them, because it is one of the tallest structures in the city at the time. It's the second tallest. Secret number 5, the bridge is built 4 times stronger than it needs to be. Again, one of the things that Roebling really wanted to stress was that the bridge was strong. Technically, the towers and the design of the roadway and anchorages should hold the roadway up. That's one of the things that fascinated John Roebling so much. But Washington used double the amount of cable work needed to hold the roadway up, some of it decorative, some of it psychological. And the bridge is built to withstand nearly 19,000 tons at one time, not moving. So that's a lot of tonnage. So a year later, after this tragic accident with the pileup of the people, the bridge does something that was a good PR move for both P.T. Barnum, our circus guy, but also the bridge, which was P.T. Barnum marched 22 elephants, including his largest elephant, one of his greatest acts, Jumbo, over the bridge to assure people that the bridge was safe. Now, of course, 22 elephants is nothing in the grand scheme of 19,000 tons, but it was a spectacle that proved to everybody that this bridge was solid. There was a children's book, picture book written about it. Here's a still from it. Really neat event. And then we'll talk a little bit now about the caissons. So caissons are for the bridge, this bridge in particular. They're different for other structures, buildings, and bridges. But for this bridge, they were pine boxes that were half a block long. And what they would do is you could see the pipe sort of sticking out of them. The pine boxes would be barged out to where the bridge towers were supposed to be. Then what you would do is basically vacuum out the water, get them down to the riverbed, and then start putting men down in there with pickaxes and shovels to begin shoveling out the riverbed so that they could get this pine box to bedrock. Once it hits bedrock, they would fill it with cement. And as they're doing this, they're also building the masonry of the tower on top of it at the same time. Now, the problem with this is in situations of very high pressure, nobody knew what the bends was yet. And this was, well, nobody in America knew what the bends was yet. And this was when everybody finds out, including the chief engineer, because what's happening is they're bringing these guys in and out too quickly from areas of high pressure. They are getting nitrogen bubbles that are bubbling up in their blood, which is causing a whole line of physical maladies. And Washington Roebling himself succumbs to this after a fire in the Brooklyn anchorage. That he's running down there and he's helping guys get out, and he's running up and down, up and down, up and down. And 3 days later, he's bedridden, and his doctors are saying he's not going to make it. He probably has 1 or 2 days left. We'll talk more about that. Here's a cross schematic of them building the masonry on top while guys, you could see here in the cavity, shoveling down and down and down and down into the bedrock. You can see the sort of clamshell diggers coming down to take that excess muck out. And you can imagine, it's dark, it's tight, it's hot down there or cold down there, depending on the temperature. And you can just imagine the smell. And on top of that, you're dealing most likely for a bunch of these workers with the bends. Now, the first tower that was built was the Brooklyn Tower, and it took nearly 2 years to get the Brooklyn Tower to bedrock, and people are dying. And Washington Roebling, by the time that this process is over, he does not die, but he is so stricken with the bends, and he's so mentally shot by the whole thing that he'll very rarely leave his home during the process of building the bridge. Again, he's watching from a room at 110 Columbia Heights where he's living. And they begin the process for the New York Tower. Now, remember, I told you in the beginning of this talk that Washington Roebling was an amateur mineralogist and archaeologist, and they're sending him riverbed samples. And he's noticing that the samples that he's getting have fossils that are, he thinks, over 1 million years old. And he said, oh boy, this river bottom has not shifted in 1 million years. We cannot spare the expense or the lives to keep going. So he stops before bedrock, and they secure the caisson technically on what is sand. But it is what he says is very firm river bottom that has not shifted in a million years, and he hopes won't shift again for another million years. But I always like to tell people that the New York Tower rests on sand, not on bedrock. One guy on the tour who was already afraid of heights got a little freaked out by that, and I felt really bad. But I said, don't worry, we're all good. The bridge, because it's a suspension bridge, actually is designed to expand and contract by a couple of inches with heat and with cold. But here is a image of the New York Tower being built. And this is an actual picture. It's not a drawing. Look at all those ship masts. Those were the skyscrapers at the time of Lower Manhattan. Pretty cool. Now built into, this is my crummy picture, so I apologize. Built into the towers are these hooks that run all the way up and down the towers, and they're really great remnants of the construction process of the tower. These were derrick hooks, so there were two series of hooks. There were smaller hooks, which they ran rope through to bring the masonry from the barges as it was barged out from Red Hook. Hook them up to ropes, lift them up. The derrick, we don't have motorized cranes at the time. They're basically wooden cranes and decks that guys are working on, and they would hook into these spots, and they left the hooks there. And you could see a whole series of them when you go stop at the towers and look very closely that run up and down the tower. And here is an image of the Brooklyn Tower being just about completed, capstoned. Now, the first person to technically cross the East River by means that was not a boat or swimming was this guy, Frank Farrington, who was a chief mechanic on the project. When the two towers were finished in 1876, he took a boatswain chair, which is basically like a swing, and he swung from the Brooklyn Tower to the Manhattan Tower with much aplomb. So there were thousands of people, they say about 10,000 people on the shores of both cities cheering him on as this happens. I would have been absolutely freaked out, by the way. There's not much between him and certain death, but that little plank. I love this secret. The bridge towers were the New York City skyline for many years, of course, because the bridge towers basically rise about 275 feet in the air. The tallest building at the time was the Spire of Trinity on Broadway and Wall Street. And from even New Jersey, when you looked over to New York, you could see the towers of the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, initially, the towers, if John Roebling would have lived, would have looked a lot more Egyptian, because again, remember I told you he was into the esoteric. He was very, very fascinated with Egyptian culture, and he wanted the towers to look like Egyptian sarcophagi, or the entrances to Egyptian sarcophagi. But when Washington took over, he said, no, that was my dad being my dad. Let's make something more Gothic. And of course, that's why you have that sort of church window look to the two portals of the towers. And here are people on top of the tower. And again, looking at Lower Manhattan, you see the spire of Trinity Church. You can see Governor's Island. And of course, right over to New Jersey, because there's nothing blocking the way. Here's a picture from the Brooklyn Tower looking out over Brooklyn. And even Brooklyn, of course, looks a lot different than today. Here is a far away view from Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, looking at the towers. And you see the towers literally tower over everything. We are not used to that with the scale that we know New York at today. The Brooklyn Bridge, although an impressive sight, doesn't look like the largest thing on the skyline by far, and here it is. And I love this. This is from Weehawken. So now if we stand in Weehawken, we see a whole Lower Manhattan skyline full of skyscrapers. But at the time, looking from Weehawken out, what could you see? But the Brooklyn Bridge is really all you can make out. Now we can't even see Brooklyn from Weehawken now. Secret number 8. Once endangered peregrine falcons nested in the bridge towers. I also like this story as well. Peregrine falcons still nest in some of the cubby holes that were built into the towers themselves. Peregrine falcons were endangered by the 1950s because DDT pesticide was making their eggshells very soft. So when mothers were sitting on the shells, they'd break. The population had dwindled down to endangered numbers. And then restoration efforts in the late 80s and 90s have brought them back big time. They're off the endangered list, by the way. And peregrine falcons love urban areas because they like tight nests and tight spaces, and they love big buildings. They love to nestle under windows, and they love the Brooklyn Bridge. And here's a picture of a peregrine falcon actually dipping down from one of the sort of cubby holes at the very, very top of one of the towers, which I normally point out on the tour. And only once did I see the bird, but other times I say, just trust me, they're there. They're around. They also nest in other structures, the roadway and the anchorages, but they like to be as high as they can get. We'll talk a little bit about the cables now too. So remember I mentioned before the cables. So you'll see here that to form the suspension cables, there were 4 main suspension cables that the Brooklyn Bridge is designed off of. And to make those cables, you'll see here they had these very large drums of 1-inch steel wire that they arduously basically threw from Brooklyn over the Brooklyn Bridge, Brooklyn Tower, between the Brooklyn Tower, Manhattan Tower, from the Manhattan Tower down into the Anchorage I-bars, strung them, and then sent it back over to Brooklyn. And again, as I said, this process took 7 years to complete, with all of these drums running all of this wire, because what they wanted to do is they wanted to form a base wire of about 300 or so of these individual strands, which they would then couple 19 to 20 of those larger wires into the main suspender cables that we have today. And if I believe my stat is right, I believe there's 14,000 miles of cable in that bridge, which is incredible. Here's a picture of some of the bridge company fathers standing on a platform built before the roadway was built. And I'm not showing you the picture because of them. I'm showing you the picture because of this wheel, because this wheel with this hook here is what's taking that very thin wire across the towers, across the river. And you can see this is the sign is signed by Washington Roebling, engineer in chief. Break step. Here's another shot of them. This is a little harder to see, but again, them running the suspender wire. One of the things I love about this perspective is they built, when the towers were done, they built this little palisade from Brooklyn to each of the towers. And the first person to walk that palisade, which we'll talk about in a little bit, was a woman. And it was Washington Roebling's wife, Emily, who had taken on the job of running back and forth between the workers at the bridge on behest of her husband, who was not leaving the house. She really becomes sort of the chief engineer by the end of the process, and she is honored with being the first woman to walk this palisade and then cross the bridge as well. And the Roeblings put together this device, which helped to seal all of the cables in the suspender tube itself. They called it, as you can see here, wrapping the cables. Almost looks like a ship wheel. And then what they did, as you can see, not only with the main suspender cables, but then there were suspension cables that were holding up the roadway. And 2 sets, as you can see, that iconic spider web look that the Brooklyn Bridge is famous for, mainly because of this picture here, which was lacking in that mosaic in Chamber Street. Going to take a slight diversion to talk about the bridge jumpers. There is a history of people jumping the bridge. They continue to do so. As a matter of fact, it's been said by the NYPD that at least one person successfully jumps the bridge every year, or attempts to successfully jump the bridge. I believe the last person to do so was last year. I believe there was somebody new. It was 2 years when I was, last time I gave the tour in person, but I think somebody recently did. And usually when people are doing it today, it's to claim their lives. But there were some jumpers who did it for spectacle or did it for a good cause. And the first jumper, actually thought he was doing it for a good cause. And what happened was he was a professor of swimming, and he wanted to prove to people that if you jumped out of a building, if it was on fire and there was something to catch you at the base of the building, that you wouldn't die from the fall. The impact would kill you if there was nothing there, but some people thought the pressure of the fall would kill you. So he and his mother needed some money, and he lived with his mother in upstate New York. So he put this whole thing together. He was very responsible about it. He had people waiting for him in a boat under the span, so that when he popped up, he could just get up in the boat. Again, he was not trying to take his life. But what happened was, and he knew how to dive. He was a very good diver, and he calculated everything. But the one thing he didn't calculate was the wind gusts. And as we know, the Brooklyn Bridge can be quite windy. And as he jumps off of the bridge, it's about 5:30 in the evening. A wind gust takes his body, tilts it on a diagonal, and he hits the water full force on a diagonal and ruptures 3 major organs. They pull him out of the water alive, and the first thing he asks is, "Did I do it? Did I do it?" And they say, "Yes, you did it. You're great." 40 minutes later, he bleeds out and unfortunately passes away. But this guy, Steve Brody, by the way, he is a Bowery boy. He's sort of this, I don't want to say gangster, but he's a rough boy from the Bowery, and he wants to make it rich. And he thinks that if he can create a spectacle of jumping off the Brooklyn Bridge, that he will become famous. And actually, he's right. But a lot of historians think that Steve Brody's jump was actually all staged. It was fake. It was well timed. It was a doll. He was basically waiting in a boat when everybody's watching. They throw something that looks like a guy off of the bridge, and he pops up out of the water fine. The reason why is he has no bruises, no nothing. He's absolutely great. He pops out of the water. He gets on the boat, and he says he survives. And he is famous for this. He gets a lot of money. He gets deals. He opens a bar. There's a movie made about him. Jimmy Cagney plays Steve Brody. But my favorite homage to Steve Brody is Bugs Bunny, because it is Bugs Bunny who makes Steve Brody jump off the bridge.
What's up, Doc? What's up, Doc? What?
Don't tell me. I know. What's up, Doc? Rabbits. Everybody's a rabbit. Oh, come on now, Brody. Get hold of yourself. You ain't a rabbit. What's up, Doc? What's up, Doc? What's up, Doc? Please, officer, you gotta help me. I'm flipping me lid. Everybody's turning into rabbits.
What's all this about rabbits, Doc?
Not historically accurate, but definitely Bugs Bunny. Secret number 9. We're almost done. The Brooklyn Bridge was a toll bridge for almost a decade. So you did have to pay when it first opened. It actually cost a cent to cross by foot. If you wanted to walk, you had to pay a penny. And as you see here in the notes, 5 cents for a horse and rider, 10 cents for a horse and wagon. And if you were bringing cattle over, it costs 5 cents per cow and 2 cents per sheep. I like to sort of bring that fact out because I think it might be a little hard for us today to even imagine traveling over the Brooklyn Bridge with cattle or sheep or a horse and a wagon. But it was obviously the only way, or you could put them on the Fulton Ferry, but they were charged, as you could see, for it. Pedestrian tolls were rolled back in 1891, and then all the other tolls were rolled back in 1911. Initially, they had levied the tolls to help, again, pay for the bridge building. And this is how the roadway was divided. Obviously, you saw that in the video with the train going over. I always like to say, in case this wasn't hammered home enough during the talk, that a lot of people think the promenade was a later modern add-on for pedestrians. Absolutely not. The Roeblings from the very beginning, actually it was John Roebling who insisted on trying to make the bridge almost like a park space for New Yorkers to sort of get out of the urban density of the city and enjoy great views, good air, especially in the summer. And that's how we have the promenade. As you know, if you've walked the bridge recently, the promenade is sort of a Thunderdome fight between bikers and pedestrians, which again, that Scott Francisco proposal is trying, hopefully, to alleviate at some point. And here's just another great rendering of how span space was shared on the bridge at the time of the bridge's opening, at the time that this would be a toll bridge. By the way, a lot of people ask where were tolls collected. So I believe that most of the tolls were collected in the train depot for pedestrians. And then I have never, ever once, and if anybody knows or have seen, I've never seen a toll booth for the carriages. I've never seen a picture, if anybody's seen one, but I'm assuming they had to be at street level. And the last element we'll talk about is the roadway, because actually the roadway made of steel, Washington Roebling wanted that steel to come from Bethlehem, and it was very late. It was very, very delayed. And the towers were sitting there and the cables were sitting there and the roadway was not showing up. And the bridge took 14 years in total to build. And this is at about year 13, people are really sick of waiting for the bridge. Both cities are complaining. And it's at this time, because Washington Roebling is really not present as part of this process, his wife is, that they're calling for his removal of chief engineer. Can you imagine 13 years on the job? And in basically the 11th hour, they vote whether or not to replace him. And he is saved by one vote. And actually, right after that vote, the steel does show up. The whole roadway goes up in about 7 months, very, very quickly. But again, people were very frustrated. As you can see, here's, again, these very brave souls who were sitting up on these catwalks looking down onto the building of the roadway. Still the same structure that we use today. And the Brooklyn Daily Eagle in their complaint said, one end of the Brooklyn Bridge is falling down of old age, but they hope to have the other end completed in time to make some repairs on the first end before the other end falls down also. A very smart-ass way of saying, basically the towers are going to fall and the bridge will be crumbled of old age before it's ever used as a bridge. And again, to watch something be built for 14 years and not have it move in those last years. Well, I think we might know a little bit something about that. Secret number 10, and probably one of the greatest things about the bridge, is a woman finished the bridge as chief engineer, and Washington Roebling would never cross the bridge. He didn't see the big deal when it was finished. As a matter of fact, during that opening day, he said, I don't know why we're even having a party. I just want to hang signs on both sides that says the bridge is done and open it up. But that was not how it went. And of course, after his tragedy with the bends and being bedridden, he is also emotionally really not able to leave the house anymore. Chief Engineer, actually, that book I was telling you about by Erica Wagner, also says it's due to a lot of what he saw in the Civil War, because he did do service in the Civil War. And Emily Roebling was an incredibly fascinating, strong, intelligent woman who took the work over. As a matter of fact, there's an image of Washington Roebling sitting in his window with his spyglasses. He said he could see everybody by face working on the bridge, and he would tell Emily, who was running down to the bridge site about 3 times daily, what to do, where to place the men, and what the men should be doing. But eventually she starts getting her own ideas as well, and correspondences running back and forth to Washington are now labeled Mrs. Washington Roebling. And when the towers are completed and there is a reception for that, she is the one honored. When the bridge is completed, she is the one honored. By rooms full of men, she walks in and takes all of the honor because she was a very pivotal part of the process. And how they met, I love this story because Washington Roebling was in the Army. Uh, Her brother, Emily's brother, was his commanding officer. They met at a party in Cold Spring, New York, and apparently it was love at first sight. Washington fell madly in love with her, and she with him. And there was this quote that he said later on in his life about having the bends and the pressure of completing the bridge. He said, "At first I thought I would succumb, but I had a strong tower to lean upon, my wife, a woman of infinite tact and wisest counsel." And there she is. She actually gets her law degree from NYU after finishing the bridge before they move back to Trenton, because they will move back to Trenton after building the bridge, her in Washington, because that's where the Roeblings were from, by the way. I neglected to mention that the Roeblings set up their company for steel rope manufacture in Trenton. There is a museum. Their home is a museum in Trenton. They were considered distinguished New Jersey citizens, by the way. She gets her law degree. Very, very smart, very, very talented. And unfortunately, she will pass away in 1903, leaving Washington, who was supposed to die before the bridge was even completed, a heartbroken widow. As a matter of fact, he goes to Mark Twain's daughter's grave and had a grave rubbing in his collection of things, the grave rubbing that Mark Twain put on his daughter's grave. And it is a very moving inscription. And I do not have it. I don't think I have a slide of it, but I can send it. Very, very sweet. Their love was really great. He said that when he proposed marriage to her, he wrote a letter and he said, "I propose to steal the only thing of value in Cold Spring, and I will do it by rendering the name of the object unrecognizable." And basically what he was saying is, I'm going to marry you and I'm going to change your name and I'm going to take you from Cold Spring. And of course, how romantic is that? She says yes. There is this great Roebling statue in Anchorage Park on the Brooklyn side of the bridge. And that was done by Keith Goddard, who we recently lost, I believe in May or June. Recently, Keith Goddard was a great artist and sculptor. He did all of the sculpture panels around the towers of the Brooklyn Bridge. He was English, but he lived in Brooklyn Heights for many, many, many years. And for the 1983 centennial, he was commissioned to do this Roebling statue and those panels. And the Roebling statue is a representation, silhouette of all three of the Roeblings who made the bridge possible. The gentleman standing in the back is John. Washington is pointing and Emily is behind him. And it's a very simple sculpture. And again, installed in 1983, but it's really great once you take a good look at it. And this is a stop on the tour. Unfortunately, the DOT has closed off Anchorage Plaza as of July. It looks like they're doing something. I don't know what, but it looks like there's some work that's going on that they have commandeered Anchorage Plaza. So you can't get to it, but you could see it from the street. Now, right behind them is the entrance to the Brooklyn Bridge Plaza, Anchorage. Which was an event space for many years. You could go in, you could have parties there, you could do shows, art shows, dance shows, theatrical performances. And one day, our intrepid tour guide, Mandy Edgecombe, who some of you may be familiar with, actually noticed the door was open. So, and she didn't break in, the door was open. Somebody left the door open, so she snuck in. She calls me immediately. And we go back the next morning, and lo and behold, the door is still open. So I run over there with her. And this is a picture of my feet finding the Brooklyn Bridge time capsule, which is right on the other side of the entrance to what was the event space, sunk in 1983, and to be opened in 2083. I don't think I'll be here for that, but this was an entryway. Now, what you can see here is the old masonry work from the bridge, but then also what they did to make this a viable event space for people to enter in it. These gates were used to sort of lock up different areas. That was original. That's the ceiling. That almost looks like a coal hole to dump coal in it, but I don't think it would be, unless they were planning on storing coal here. There's gates again, and you can see the DOT still uses this space for storage, for different projects. you could see that they had electrical outlets along the way here. And here's a wide shot of one of the interior chambers and some orbs for John Roebling. And then what we found were records. So the DOT actually has these filing cabinets all throughout the space. And these are nut and bolt specifications or screw specifications for, as you see, June 20th, 1901, the Williamsburg Bridge. Pretty cool. So the tour ends at the spot that 110 Columbia Street was, the Roebling residence, which is now the entryway to the promenade, not the Brooklyn Bridge Promenade, but the Brooklyn Heights Promenade, which overlooks Lower Manhattan. This house was taken down in the 40s. And they recently, 2 years ago, named that street Emily Warren Roebling Way. And these are descendants of Washington and Emily. A very nice honor for Emily and the Roeblings. And I end on what I think is one of the coolest notes. Well, that was when they were taking apart the old Kosciuszko Bridge. And I was actually training Mandy and another guide to do the tour back in the day. And I ended at the spot and I go, wait a minute, I think that's the Kosciuszko Bridge going by. So I took a picture of it. But that's what the view from 110 Columbia Heights looked like. Unfortunately, the bridge view is now eclipsed, unfortunately. But Washington Roebling, the last note I leave you with, is of the man who was considered to be fairly absent and supposed to die early on in the process because of the bends, actually outlives everybody involved in the bridge process. And he lives into the 1920s. And again, like his father, he was an extremely forward-thinking gentleman. No one in his family wanted to take over the Roebling business. So at the age of, I believe it was in his early 80s, he had to go back to work full time. And the first thing that he did, he electrified the mills, which was, they were trying to talk him out of it. They said, you know, why are you going to electrify the mills? Let it go. It's a very expensive process. And he said, if we're going to live on into the future, we have to. And he did. He oversaw it. And he was interviewed and they said, you know, Washington, why are you doing this? You have already have fame. You're already well taken care of. He said, it's my job to carry out the responsibility and you can't desert your job. You can't slink out of life or out of the work life lays on you. He will die peacefully in his sleep about a year after saying this. And because of what he did, there is Roebling steel in the Bear Mountain Bridge, in the George Washington Bridge, and in the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. And this is the Walker Evans photo. Walker Evans took this photo from underneath the bridge on the Brooklyn side. This is also a stop that I take. It's one of my favorite pictures of the bridge because it's so unique. And I leave you with Brooklyn Mayor Seth Lowe's quote, "The beautiful and stately structure fulfills the fondest hope. The impression upon the visitor is one of astonishment that grows with every visit. No one who has been upon it can ever forget it. No one shall see it and not feel prouder to be a man or woman." And that is very true. Beautiful, beautiful picture. So I thank you. And I will now go to, I don't see anything in Q&A, but I do see some chats. So let's see. Okay, let's go. Such a cool film. Yes, I will give you the links as I have I believe I'm two presentations behind. Guastavino from last week is going out, if those of you were on there. And then Penn will be going out, and then Brooklyn Bridge will be the final video sent for Archtober. I will put the links to the YouTube videos that I used in there so you can see it. I remember the Centennial was spectacular. Yes, I was 4 years old during the Centennial, and I have a very brief memory of watching we were at the Jersey Shore with my grandparents, and I remember watching something on TV and going, "Whoa, that's amazing." Marcy, yes, that film is really cool. There's another. I believe you're probably referring to the Edison film. There is another Edison film from Manhattan to Brooklyn as well. What's the name of the book with Jumbo on the bridge? I have it in my notes, Marcy. Give me a second. I can get it to you, or I can put it in the link. I actually think Michelle has a copy of it in the Untapped books, the communal Untapped bookshelf. I'm just trying to call out my notes here. Brooklyn Bridge. All right, I'll get back to you, Marcy, about that. But I think it's something. I think Jumbo is in the title of it. Wasn't Emily the first woman lawyer? I do not know if she was the first woman lawyer. There was a woman who came on the tour who worked for NYU who knows. There are notes from her time in the library, and she was in a class with other women at the time, but I'm not sure if she was the first. I can check on that. Can you send the info for the sculpture artist of the Roeblings? Yeah, sure. I can send you a link, Janet, to Keith Goddard's portfolio and his website. Super, super nice guy. I spoke to him twice on the phone because he is also the gentleman who did the 23rd Street and our Hats in the Breeze. And that's something that I have on our Subway Art Tour. So I contacted all the stops on the Subway Art Tour. I contacted all the artists, and he was just a delight to talk to, a very nice guy. And he loved talking about his work. And he actually even volunteered to join one of the tours to speak about the work. And he said, "I'm very nervous about the trains, though. It's going to be loud down there." I said, "Don't worry, I have mics." And he was like, "Great, I'll be there." But he said he was spending some time in France when he left, and then I never heard from him again. We had the pandemic, and that was it. Yeah, sure. No, I can, Marcy, I will send you the name. I can text you the name in probably 5 minutes as soon as we're done. I know exactly where it is in my notes, but my phone's being a little slow. And I didn't call up my notes for this talk, which all from the noggin. Any other questions or comments? So again, this is the last Archtober talk. So if you are not an insider, and you want to continue doing events like this, you can please become an insider. But insiders, we actually have an event tonight. We have a book launch talk, Magical New York, with Kevin Dan, who's going to be talking a little bit about actually the esoteric in New York. Fascinating, and magicians. Very fascinating book. Gail, thank you. Oh, Gail, you were on World's Fair this weekend. Good to see you again. This time in the digital. Glad you came. Nice. All right. Well, with that then, I will let you all go to your afternoons. Please be well. Please be safe. Insiders, I may see some of you later. You will get the email with the recording of this and some of the resources probably in a day or two. So just give me a chance to catch up on the other ones. And have a good one, guys. Stay safe.